while we were in the hospital, we got the notification from the State Department of Education that they were calling for this public hearing and giving me like 60 days to get the names in of people who would speak. So later I was trying to pull together some archives, and I found the yellow legal pad that Joe and I had used to make notes in the hospital, and they're just all tear stained.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. We are back today with Zan Tyler and talking about her amazing journey that the Lord set her on. But how many years ago was that? 30? I can't count.
Oh my goodness. I don't think I can
I shouldn't
count
ask you that, right?
It was
That's making me do math.
So I think it was like 37 years ago.
Yeah. Abby, you like math. Figure that out. Anyway, yep. Abby knows. Don't ask me to do math on the podcast.
37. I think it was 37 years ago.
Yeah. So that is quite a journey. So we kind of left off at you not really having a vision for your kids to homeschool them. You were trying to get through that first year with your oldest son.
That's right.
And then what did the Lord do after that? After you were threatened with jail time, you finally got the thumbs up and the okay to homeschool. It wasn't just smooth sailing.
No, it's interesting. At the end of that first year, I looked at Joe and I said, this has been such an awful year in terms of everything going on around us. But what's happened in our home has been so significant. I was a stay-at-home mom before my kids were in preschool, half days, not even every day. Excuse me. But it, it was just, there was such a huge difference in our family life and the way Ty was learning. And it was powerful. And I looked at Joe, I said, I'd sort of like to do this maybe one more year. I feel like God may be calling us to do this one more year. And he looked at me and said, yeah, I was kind of afraid of that.
Here we go again.
Yeah, that's right. He does a workshop called Confessions of a Homeschool Dad, what to do when you think your wife is crazy. And then he just, of course, has become the biggest supporter and enthusiast ever of homeschooling. But so we did, and we started off fairly normally this year. This is our second year. We were approved to homeschool without all the terrifying nonsense surrounding it. And then one night, it was either in late November or early December. I'm a night owl, and so the kids would go to bed, and then that's when I would stay up and write and prepare lesson plans and, try to make sense of what was going on with our schooling. Still no real role models out there for us. I get this knock on the door. I mean, it was close to midnight.
Oh, wow.
And, your first thought when you get a midnight knock is, okay, it's the police, it's who is it? And I opened the door. It's a neighbor from around the corner. His son was one of my son's best friends, and his wife was a teacher in public schools. And he said, Zan, we love you. We really kind of hate homeschooling, but we love you. And so there's something I need to tell you. He said, do you know what the state register is? I said, no. He was the head of a state agency professionally. And he said, anytime somebody wants to pass a law in a state agency, they can put it in the state register. And if it sits there for 90 days without any action or anybody objecting, it automatically becomes law. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
So he said, I was going through the state register and I came across these guidelines that the State Department of Education is promulgating, which will become law if you don't do something about it. And they were requiring that that homeschoolers have a 4-year college degree and only use state-approved text.
Wow.
So that meant no Christian curriculum, nobody who'd been in college 2 years or a high school graduate could homeschool. And so, I mean, I'm looking at this and I think, Lord, what am I going to do with this? Joe and I had been amassing a little bit of a database on our Tandy 1000, which was cutting edge technology at the time. And just names of people who had even heard of homeschooling. People, all these educational advocates were calling us from around the country. Now, how they got my name pre-internet days, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But so I've accumulated this list of like 400 names, which seems huge, at the time. Now,
Sure.
I could have counted the number of homeschoolers I knew on two hands,
Right.
And so I called my attorney and he said, Zan, you've got to the only way to stop this is to request a public hearing on these regulations. And you've got to get 25 letters in to the state superintendent of education to accomplish that. So Joe and I got out our first homeschool letter. And at the bottom, I mean, the technology of the day is carbon paper. And I said, so please send your letter requesting this public hearing and send me a copy so I know when we get to 25.
Sure.
Well, I got over 100 letters.
Wow. And it didn't matter if they were from out of state. These were just letters.
These were just letters. These were just letters. And I'm sure 25 of those had to be in state, but we had had that, we had that part of it covered at least, evidently. And and so we called the first public hearing in the state. And so, it's interesting the way the Lord works, because I was pregnant with our third child during this time. And I lost the baby when I was about 6 months pregnant and almost died. So I was in the hospital for several days. Wow. And while we were in the hospital, we got the notification from the State Department of Education that they were calling for this public hearing and giving me like 60 days to get the names in of people who would speak. So later I was trying to pull together some archives and I found the yellow legal pad that Joe and I had used to make notes in the hospital, and they're just all tear stained.
Wow.
And, so you know how you just have these, like the memories of being threatened with jail, that memory of losing joy and God calling us that week to plan the public hearing. I mean, it just those things that the hard things the Lord calls you to, and yet he gives you the grace to do it.
Yeah.
Wow. So we had the one man who dealt with me at the State Department of Education told me we had 20 minutes. Dr. Moore was coming out to speak as our expert witness from the state of Washington.
The man that you said you'd never read his book, right?
Yes, that man. That's right. And so we weren't connected yet with HSLDA, and this is 1986. So he said he would fly out, but we still had all these. I mean, this is just costing a lot of money. No state organization. We've had legal fees. We're living on one income, and I'm saying, Lord,
and you're a mom. You're an ordinary
I'm a stay-at-home mom. That's right. And so, Dr. Moore comes down. My dad got involved. He knew the chairman of the curriculum instructional committee that was in charge of it. And he said, he called me up. I'll never forget, Hayward McDonald called me up and he said, Zan, you can have all day if you want to. Everybody who wants to speak will speak and we will listen, And I'll never forget that day because we just had such a glorious day of people speaking. Dr. Moore was there, all these homeschool parents I was meeting for the first time, and they were speaking, and people were just coming up and handing me checks and cash. Wow. And by the end of the day, I had enough money to pay the honorarium, his airfare, his hotel, It was really amazing to watch. Now, the State Department of Education said, we really don't care what you have to say. These regulations are going to the legislature as we've written them. So, in one sense, what we did didn't make a difference, but in the other sense, it was sort of the birth of the freedom movement in South Carolina. I don't know how to describe that. Sure. And so this is when I really started lobbying, if you can call it lobbying. My senator had been the USC football coach, the real USC, University of South Carolina. And
whoa.
So
You're talking to a California girl here.
Yeah, I know. I'm just teasing. Y'all got the trademark, so we can't even use USC anymore. But I went to see him. He also had gotten his PhD in education, and his daughter and I had met each other at Girl State, this program. I had been governor of Girl State, and so I knew Beezy, and so then I knew the senator. It's just interesting the way the Lord works. And I went and saw Senator Gaze. And this was not my plan, but I just sat there and bawled my eyes out and told him what the last 2.5 or last year and a half had looked for me. And I mean, he couldn't believe it. And he became my crusader in the legislature. He sponsored every piece of homeschooling legislation. He almost lost his bid for re-election to the state Senate. And he and Joe Wilson, who is now our congressman, really both, I mean, it really cost them politically to support us in the early days. But they said, we'll call a new public hearing. And Senator Gaze taught me such an important lesson that day. He said, Zan, you get everybody there you get everybody there They don't have to homeschool. You just get me a crowd, because at the end of the day, politicians might not know a lot, but they can all count.
Yeah.
And I mean, so we just packed. I mean, we probably had, at this first public hearing on the Senate side, we probably had 600 or 700 people.
Wow.
And this is before grassroots movements were a thing. And there were reporters everywhere. What is this group that got these 700 people here? And
wow, that's God.
So it was. And so then, I mean, we didn't know that we were still 6 years away from a good law, but it was a start.
Yeah.
And
that's amazing. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Are you looking for a fantastic online math program that removes the burden of teaching math? Then Teaching Textbooks is for you. Our family's been using teaching textbooks for years, and we couldn't be happier. Our girls say that it makes learning math fun, like a game, and they love that it's interactive. Teaching Textbooks uses step-by-step video instruction and does all the grading for you. The newest version is available now with an app that even works offline. Sign up for the first 15 lessons for free at teachingtextbooks.com. That's teachingtextbooks.com. We are back with Zan, and this is an incredible story as we're listening to this story. For those who have gotten to know Abby and I a little bit, I am not a crier, and Abby is a crier. And so Abby's literally texting me through this, and she's like, I'm crying.
I know. I can't. I'm sorry I haven't joined in on the conversation. I've even heard Zan's story before, and it doesn't get old. And I think it's because not only... Okay, I'll do my best. Not only because just the people that have gone before us, I think we are where we are today. I'm home with my kids every day, not having to worry about the things that you worried about because of people like you. And I'm jotting down. Okay, I'm composed now. I'm jotting down all the things you're saying. And the other thing that just has brought me to tears is just the sovereignty of God in this story. I mean, over and over from the first friend that mentioned, or even honestly, the fact that your son didn't get to redo kindergarten, the fact that they said no was a blessing, to be honest. It felt terrible in the moment, all the way to Dr. Moore's book, and then the connections you have, and then a neighbor that knocks at midnight because he randomly happened to see this thing that all it had to do is sit there for 90 days. To provision, even in times of trial, when you lost a baby, how God provided everything for this to move forward. And it's just, it's encouraging, it's inspiring for those of us living now, and it's relevant in that we can't be complacent now. So that's why this has been my quietest episode ever, as I'm sitting over here with chills and tears.
Oh, I love it. Well, you're crying for all of us. Wow. So yeah, it's a powerful story. So continue on.
Well, I'm going to deviate a little bit, because I want to explain something. I want to do some explaining.
Explaining.
One of the things that makes what we do so hard and freedom fighting so hard is because we live in a culture that doesn't understand who our kids belong to.
Yes.
So I just want to give you this one illustration, and then we can just keep moving forward with the story. Years after all this happened, I was speaking at a leadership forum. There was one sponsored by USC and one by Clemson, and I can't remember which one this was. But I was speaking as the homeschool representative to the state. I mean, to all these leaders, up and coming leaders. And so a woman in the audience raised her hand and she said, "I'd like to ask a question." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Don't you feel guilty for homeschooling your children?" I said, it took me by surprise. I said, "I have felt a lot of emotions over homeschooling. I'm not sure I feel guilt for homeschooling. Why do you ask?" And she said, "Well, you're robbing the school district of the money they would get for your kids. Mm-hmm. You're robbing the school district of 2 kids who would probably do well on standardized tests. Mm-hmm. You're robbing the school district of involved parents. And I think you should feel bad about that." And so I looked at her and I said, "Who do you think my children belong to?"
Amen.
And so this tells a little bit about me. Now, I know we talked about not rattling papers, but this is what I used to carry in my purse, which tells you a little bit about my life. And let me read it to you. So I said, let me just read you something. "The fundamental theory of liberty upon which all governments in this union repose excludes any power of the state to standardize its children by forcing them to accept instruction from public teachers only. The child is not a mere creature of the state. Those who nurture and direct his destiny have the high right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare him for additional obligations." And she looked at me like I had gotten some right-wing propaganda from somewhere. She said, "Where did you get that?" I said, "That's U.S. That's a decision from the United States Supreme Court in 1925, U.S. versus the Society of Sisters." But we live in a society of people who, like this woman, doesn't understand who our kids belong to.
That's right.
And that they're not the mere creature of the state. We sit in church on the same church pew with people every day, with our neighbors, with family members who don't understand that our children are on loan to us from God. Yes, that's true. But for legal purposes, they are ours, not the state's.
And this isn't just a harebrained idea you came up with. This is God's idea. This is God's plan. This is God's design. This is what God says, not Zan or Abby or Yvette, and that's the part we need to remember is we're not just these crazy fundamentalists. This is God's telling us these children belong to us and we have a job.
Amen. Amen. And I think we need to understand the culture, the context we live in, so that we can understand how important what you just said is.
Yeah.
So that's my little commercial break there.
That's a good one.
So you're sitting in this meeting. What was her response to you?
Silence. There was just dead silence in the room. Yeah. And but that was something so instructive for me. It did me. I mean, it was good for me to see how other people viewed what I was doing. Mm-hmm. That they didn't think, "Oh, this is her right. These are her kids." They thought, "These are our kids. Right. This is not her right." So, it's important that we understand those things because the freedoms we take for granted are inalienable rights from God. Yep. Other people don't take that for granted.
Right.
And it's not the premise they live on. Right. On a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting to think about you being a stay-at-home mom, an ordinary mom, like we talked about, who at the time, you were fighting for this freedom, literally fighting tooth and nail, which that in itself would have been a full-time job. But in the midst of that, you were also homeschooling your kids. You had 3 little kids at home that you were trying to take care of. And as moms, we get so overwhelmed sometimes and we're like, how in the world can we do it all? And the Lord, He gave you the strength. He gave you the wisdom. He gave you the resources and the people. He equipped you with everything you needed to do in order to accomplish what He had called you to, not just in homeschooling, but in being able to fight this major battle that he put in your lap, but you weren't fighting it alone.
No, I was not fighting it alone. And, of course, it was just, I think you had a copy of my book, Refined, and in it, I tell the story of the men in the fiery furnace, and Jesus was with them in the fiery furnace. The thing that made those days so precious is that I was not in the fiery furnace alone. It was like he was with me in the fiery furnace. He kept me from being burned. He led my steps. And it was, I always say when I'm telling this story, can you imagine how the lives of these 3 Hebrew men were changed when all of a sudden there was a 4th man in the fire who was unshackled and walking with them and talking with them. And they understand that he's God. He was the Son of God. And, I think for us in our most fiery furnaces, our worst positions in life, the thing that redeems them is not only the outcome, but it's the fact that Jesus is in those fiery flames with us, not only protecting us, but fellowshipping with us.
Oh, amen.
There's an old Rich Mullins song that says we're going to meet him in the furnace way before we meet him in the air. And, and I think that's when we really get to know him, and it's precious.
Yeah.
Those are glorious times.
That's so encouraging. As we were talking in the first episode at the very beginning, we were talking about just the fear that grips us so often right now, especially in what's going on in our world. And it can overcome us. But when you look at that beautiful story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walking in that furnace with God beside them, I mean, that we are in a furnace right now. We're always in a furnace, but it seems like it's been a little bit hotter the last year. And what an encouragement, what a blessing to know that we are not in this alone, and we don't have to fear. It's our fear can lead us to the cross. It can lead us to our knees to call out to him for help. And then we have to trust him to get us through this, and trust him to know that he is totally in control, even when we don't see it. Those men didn't know going into the furnace that God was going to be in there with them. They just surrendered. They surrendered. They said, okay, you do what you have to do. We're going to trust the Lord no matter what, even if we burn. We're going to
And they said that. They said God may not deliver
That's right.
us.
Right.
Yep. But they trusted that the outcome was going to be his no matter what. So we are out of time for this episode. We are going to be back tomorrow. We're going to continue this story with Zan, and then just bring some great encouragement. Well, not that we haven't been bringing great encouragement, but bring more great encouragement to you, because that's what we do here on the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. So you guys, thank you so much for listening today. Zan, thank you for your time again today. We'll be back tomorrow. You guys can find out more about Zan at her website, zantyler.com. We'll put that link in the show notes. And if you guys have not yet left a review for the podcast, please go do that and share this podcast with your friends. We know that they will be encouraged by it as well. So thank you guys. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye.